Good morning, everyone. I am Jack Madrid, and welcome to Industry Beacon, where we feature the industry's tech titans shaping our future. We're not just talking about success stories, we are diving deep into the hearts and minds and to see what drives them as we decode the future one digital dialogue at a time. This morning, we will talk about reclaiming humanity in the age of artificial intelligence. The ITBPM Summit was really so positively received. The topic was reclaiming humanity in this age of AI. Maybe you can just give us, for the audience who is not there, just give us your own views on that topic.
So I think a lot about what it means to be human in this moment is understanding how to separate fact from fiction, looking at the hype and making judgments about what to believe, what not to believe, and getting a more complete view of reality and the risks that face businesses, societies, and political systems on the whole. So I think it's about educating ourselves, being more literate about what it is that we're engaging in, how AI can help augment our lives, but always keeping a sense of what we want our societies to be like so that we're using technology in service to that goal.
You know, there's so much noise and buzz and I would say hype about AI. You know, it's been reported to be evolving at such an accelerated pace that has made, you know, Filipinos here concerned that whether we can keep up or not. And with that kind of pace that AI is accelerating, some people might think that the potential, you know, for it is somewhat limitless. Mm-hmm. Now, what's your take on this, and what kinds of activities, you know, will generative AI take over from humans?
Right, so it can be quite helpful to think about our jobs in terms of tasks and in terms of skills. So tasks are things that maybe we can automate, that are repeatable, you could do at scale or at speed that machines could take over. Then you have skills, so abilities to have conversations, to meet in person, build trust, build relationships, soft skills, the psychological skills to understand the cultural zeitgeist or relationships between people, and those are things that are harder to replicate in machines. And I think the other thing as well is that we have this huge capacity for imagination, for a moral imagination, values-based imagination, and creativity and novelty, which machines cannot do without a huge amount of prompting and interference, let's say, by humans. So I think thinking about the things that we are very skilled in and that we can upskill in, so being literate in digital technologies and AI, but always remembering that it's those interpersonal, psychological, cultural components that we're inherently good at that machines aren't, and focusing on them.
So that sounds like a rather optimistic view. You know, they're not about to, these machines and these robots are not about to take over our lives just yet.
Just yet.
Now, on that point, what do you think the humans' advantages are over AI?
So one of the things that is interesting to think about when we're considering AI, we talk about it as artificial intelligence, but the intelligence is reliant on a very particular type of data, the training data that is input to a system, which up until now has mostly been stuff that we've put on the internet, right? But that stuff is mostly language, it's visual, it's video, and it's audio. You and I are sitting here in the studio, we've got a glass of water, we're breathing air, we're smelling whatever smells are going on, we've just had lunch, we've eaten, we're microbiomes in our guts, like we're much more complex beings and we're ecosystemic in the way that we experience the world. Machines are not. The training data is a tiny sliver of our full experience as human beings, as animals, as part of this kind of natural living world. And so it will only be able, the machines and AI will only be able to operate off a tiny model of an abstraction of reality. So we shouldn't confuse the fullness and meaning and richness of intelligence, of what it means to be human, with the kind of intelligence we're talking about in machines. It's basically a way to automate and analyze decision-making based on a huge amount of data. It's not the same as wisdom. It's not the same as the fullness of knowledge that we have access to. When we end up with embodied AI, so AI that's on board robots that maybe have sensors that can replicate some kind of version of sight or smell or whatever, then we'll be talking about something a bit different. But for the time being, we're not there yet. So, yeah.
So AI is only as good as the quality, the accuracy, and the structure of the data. So if it's bad data, then it's like garbage in, garbage out,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, perfect.
Wow, okay. That brings me to a question about the risks and perils that AI may bring. And how can we, while we still have time, how can we
Yes.
prevent this from happening?
So one of the biggest risks I'm worried about is that we believe that the future is written. It's a sense of technological determinism, that the future is determined. It's determined by the people who roll out the most powerful or adopted technology. And this is simply not true. But I think it serves technology companies that are pushing this for us to buy into that story, right? But actually we have a huge amount of agency, and businesses in particular, to be able to say, we're going to use artificial intelligence in very specific, intentional ways, decide what data we're going to use. How do we remove bias, whether it's racial bias, gender bias, age bias, access, whatever kind of bias it could be. How do we create systems that enable us to act in more ethical ways? Because, humans are flawed, but we can try and overcome some of our flaws by thinking more carefully about which qualities we want to augment. What are the things that most will help us to adapt? So rather than focusing just on, for instance, the sciences, which are important, thinking about ethics, thinking about arts, thinking about ways in which we want to build societies that include more people, that are more democratic. So I think actually what I'm getting at here is that we have this moment in time to use this possibility and peril paradigm to say, what is it that we want to move towards? What kind of society do we want? Existentially, what do we want to be as a species as we face climate change and biodiversity loss, and we're exceeding all these planetary boundaries? How do we tackle that and use technology in service to the flourishing of life? And I know it's a big question, but everything rides on how we approach that right now, including technology.
It sounds like there's going to be AI for good
Yes.
and then AI for bad. So, wow, that's...
There's always bad actors, right? But I think many of us care a lot about the quality of lives that we have. And we want a sense of belonging. We want to relate to one another. We want to live in peace. And so it's figuring out pathways towards that.
Well, one of the topics that was discussed at the ITBPM Summit the past 2 days was really the concern about the loss of jobs, given that, our industry, the ITBPM industry, is one of the biggest job generators of the Philippines.
Yeah.
In the future of work, what kinds of skills do you recommend that, Filipinos, you've been in the country for a few days now, what kinds of skills to prepare ourselves for the new work types should we be preparing for?
So I think one thing that's really important is critical reasoning and adaptability, right? Because there's got to be the ability to judge and discern what's the output of this technology. Is it useful? Is it valuable? Or is it, you're saying garbage in, garbage out. How do we use the technology in the right way, in the right place and time? So that quality of discernment, and that's something that we can educate young people in through school systems and the rest of it. I think the other piece that I've thought about, and we've had discussions about this, is being able to give people access to not just the arts and the sciences, but the full plethora of what education has to offer. Engineering, prompting, psychology. We're going to need all of these skills, a fullness of skills, if you like, to be able to adapt and understand how best to use technology. And so I think it's this kind of potential for really synthesizing these different qualities and making sure that our schools support young people in pursuing technology alongside psychology, for instance. So yeah, that kind of robust education.
We're going to pick up on that point, but for now we're going to take a quick break. Industry Beacon will be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Industry Beacon. Let's continue our discussion with author and web psychologist Nathalie Nahaï. Nathalie, we were talking about skills before the break. Let's continue on that, because Filipinos have been reading and are concerned.
Yes.
About what's going to happen to their jobs. What am I studying? Is it relevant? Am I going to have a job after I graduate? you know, with all this hype about AI. So let's pick up on that. What are the other kinds of skills should young Filipinos be preparing for?
Well, one of the things, and I'd like to answer that with an example. Last year, in 2023, Goldman Sachs made this big prediction, and they said that we're going to see 300 million jobs lost or degraded by AI. And this is big hype around anxiety of job loss and how to be prepared, these questions. And a year on, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, in the Financial Times, there was an article that was written about people in the legal profession. And we know that there are huge amounts of text that people have to write in, or read and write in legal cases. It's grueling, it requires a huge amount of mental effort. And most of us, many of us, feel very overloaded with the amount of work that we have to do. And this article was citing seniors within the legal industry, saying that actually when associates come in, when they enter the legal industry, if they end up using tools such as Claude or ChatGPT to do the work, they're not going to do the learning that they need to be able to learn what they need in their industry, to have the grit, the perseverance, the knowledge, the expertise, to then make good judgment calls. So when they get to a point of senior management, they'll have basically impoverished their understanding because they've outsourced all this stuff at the beginning. So I think there are some interesting questions around where and when we use technology. And despite the hype, people in positions of authority are being more thoughtful about the long-term impacts and thinking, okay, what is it actually that we want to teach the younger people so that we're not just using tech as like a cognitive prosthesis, like an extra limb, and then we're making ourselves dumber because of it. So I think in terms of skills, that would be one of the key skills. It's discernment. When do we need to use this? How do we check the quality? How do we get to make sure that people are educated in a way where they're actually reasoning, they're learning how to discern good from bad? And that key skill, that's the foundation stone, if you like, for everything else, because then it makes you more able to make quality decisions about how you use the technology appropriately.
One of the things I remember about your presentation at the summit was the importance of that spark of
Yes.
creativity.
Yeah.
Filipinos are known to be very creative people, and I want Filipinos to feel confident about
Yes.
that. How can we use that creativity with AI?
Yes, so when it comes to things like communication, services, hospitality, creativity and imagination and rapport, being able to read someone's body language, their needs, interpersonal relationships, that's complex stuff. And if you're naturally more good at it or you're oriented towards that, those are the kinds of skills that are harder to replicate. So if you know that you're having a conversation with someone and the conversation isn't landing and you can see them start to shut down or they're uncomfortable or the language is perhaps not quite right, we can adapt in real time. We don't even think about it consciously much of the time. But that kind of stuff is hard for machines to do at the moment. So these sorts of skills which rely on that psychological, empathetic, emotional intelligence, those things are things that we can focus on augmenting in people because it's going to be more important as we go on.
Because AI or a robot cannot.
It can't. And then I think the other thing
empathize.
is, it can give us a sensation that it understands, but is it going to reach out and hold the hand? Is it going to be able to give us that sense of connection, belonging, some of the things that we yearn for as humans, that we have this understanding for? And the answer, I think, in the short term, is it can only meet a certain level of that need. It can't fulfill the complexity and richness that we hope.
The other thing I wanted to take up with you is all the billions of dollars that are being invested by all these companies, tech companies in AI. And I read an article today that said, investors are expecting a return on all that investment. And because of that, maybe this is a hype, at least for now. What are your views on this thing?
So caveat, I'm not an investor, but I do know people who are in that world. I think from what I've seen, there are certain use cases for AI which are more narrow in scope that are returning value on investments. When we're talking about things like chatbots, where the public are using these all the time, I include myself in that number, the cost of each search, which I'm doing for free, in terms of the huge amount of electricity that's being needed, the huge amount of water that's being needed, that's meaning that in the US now, nuclear facilities are being put back online, or there's the intention to put them back online, just to service the extra electricity needs, the resources required. That's also part of the picture. And so I think investors obviously need to know that they're going to get money back. But if they're not even starting to see return on investment on the newest models, which are still hallucinating more than we'd hoped, and the electricity and water costs are going up, and there's issues around things like flooding and climatic change causing issues at places like, places where you get some of the raw materials, like all of these things are interconnected. So unless we're getting real return on investment soon, I think there is going to be an adjustment in terms of what people are willing to invest.
That does sound like we're in this hype.
The Gartner hype cycle.
Wow.
Yes, yeah.
Does that mean you were talking about energy? Does that mean that every time we do a prompt or we prompt ChatGPT to produce something, we're consuming a lot of energy?
We're consuming a lot because it requires a huge amount of computing power. And the more complex the model, the more computing power is required. And of course, people will say, well, okay, we're getting increased efficiency, so the computing use goes down, or that the needs of the electricity and the resources goes down. But what we see time and again is that as machines, technologies historically become easier to use and the efficiencies mean that the cost is lower, it doesn't reduce the overall cost because people use it more. So it just ends up becoming this kind of increasing graph of electricity use. So it's a complicated argument to make.
We've seen these cycles before, right? Metaverse,
crypto,
RPA,
NFTs,
cloud. Yeah. Are we headed towards the same thing or even worse?
I mean, I think we are definitely on the slope towards the trough of disillusionment where we have a course correction in terms of what's hype, what's reality, where can we use this technology, what are its limitations, and then figuring out a more sensible approach where we're not just running off the hype of inflated expectations and stories from people in positions of leadership within these tech companies who want us to believe that this is going to be the panacea. It's not. It's going to radically alter how we live, yes, but it's not going to be the way that they think because we have all these other constraints. So let's be more sensible about it and see things as they are.
This morning, I met with a classroom full of academics, owners and deans of universities, and I told them never before has it been more important to focus on specific domain skills. Whatever students choose to study as their area of concentration, pursue that, because never before will it be more important in the age of AI to be good at what you do.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do you envision AI and humans finding this optimal balance of working together?
Oh, that is such a good question, Jack. I think there are some clear use cases where it can be really helpful. So for instance, if I'm thinking about, let's say, a podcast or a TV interview like this where you want the transcript, brilliant. AI is great at that, converting video and audio into text that you can then read through, you can distill it, you can create presentations out of it. So for the analysis and synthesization of data, as long as you can qualify the output and check that it's accurate, that can be fantastic. For pattern recognition, it's great. For teaching people language, you can train an agentic AI to talk with you and correct you in a second language as you learn. What are my most common mistakes? I want you to help me with my past tense verbs or whatever it is. But it cannot replace, in my opinion, the richness of interaction that comes from being with a real teacher, for instance. So my concern is that we end up creating this two-party society where people with greater resources have access to human teachers with augmentation from AI, and the others just have that AI interaction, which is easy to manipulate. It's harder to, there's an explainability issue. What happens when it's just the black box? You also don't know if the quality of the output is high and consistent. So there need to be checks and balances, guardrails, legislation, protections, human rights, cognitive liberty, which comes further down the line when we're talking about biometric sensors and how AI interfaces with that. There's a lot that we need to figure out now about how we want to live and protect citizens and bring them into the conversation, you and me and everyone else who's listening and watching.
Last question, because we have 1 minute left. I'm going to ask you to pretend you have a crystal ball. What kinds of jobs and types of work will be most affected in the next 12 to 24 months by AI, if any? Yeah,
the jobs that are most automatable. So I think in terms of things like robots, it might be stacking shelves. If you've got a task that you do again and again, like in a factory. If you're doing language translation, potentially. those sorts of jobs I think could be initially more at risk.
Well, that was certainly very enlightening, but that is it for today's show. I am Jack Madrid. Thank you so much to our valued guest, Nathalie Nahaï, for sharing your perspectives with us. Catch us again tomorrow for more enlightening discussions on Industry Beacon. You can catch BNC on Free TV Channel 31 and on Cignal Channel 24. Thank you for watching BNC, the Billionario News Channel, always on top.